So we're up on the headlands up in Peel, which is not part of the development, but looking ahead to Tynwald next week, the area plan for the north and west is due to come up. But you've got quite a lot of concerns around the number of, well, both have got concerns about the number of housing that's planned to basically be developed around the outskirts of Peel.
I mean, it's massive what is being considered and put before Tynwald next week. And I think that anybody that's got any appreciation for the beauty of the island and also wants to see brownfield sites develop first should be incredibly concerned about what Tynwald is deciding potentially next week. If all the lands are zoned in the north and west, and this is one vote on one document, it would mean that those lands get zoned on the 1st of December. And actually, I think a lot of people aren't really aware of the scale of what's happening or the nature of it in terms of greenfield sites.
And we're actually talking about all the way from Ramsey Road across to the Portown Road and then over to the cemetery, if you like. So it's all that green land. Basically, what we did what was done in 1989, that again doubled, if you like. And so since 1991 to 2021, we've had 981 houses in Peel, so we've had the last 4 years on top of that. So we're probably around about 1,300 houses and flats since then. And we're looking at doing the same again. We're not looking, but they're looking to do the same again, basically.
And well, just sort of in the more recent future of yourself, you resigned recently from the government. As part of this was about this. What is it beyond the sort of just the numbers that they're planning here that has sort of concerned you that much about it?
Well, it's a whole mixture thing, but Comin are supporting this, and I can't support that. So that's one of the conflicts, if you like, and there was something else. And there's other things. So there's a conflict between me and council ministers, so it was easier for me to walk away from that. You try and you try and try, but at the end of the day, it's collective responsibility, and I had to walk away from that because I couldn't agree with it all. So, but this comes back to, we had this in 1989, and we're now looking again, well over 100 acres of, prime farmland going to be turned into housing. We've got no industry coming into Peel. We haven't had any, very little, if you like, and there's no more planned either with this plan.
Just in terms of the housing, though, there is a case of, this government is committed to this idea of 1,000 homes over the next several years and into the next administration as well. But is there not an element of that these have to be built somewhere?
Well, actually, the reality of what's being proposed and promoted by Cabinet Office is completely wayward with current government policy, its own policy, and also Tynwald approved policy. So, first of all, in the zoning of land, that doesn't actually deliver or provide housing, but what it absolutely does is unlock it and effectively in a broad way, or authorise it for potential development in a way that's supported potentially by Tynwald. But actually, if we look back to what the emphasis has been from in the island plan, was to plan. It's laughable, really, but it's serious. But to plan for the infrastructure for an increased population. As Tim has alluded to, the population in Peel, just for example, has increased by more than 50% since the last local area plan in 1989. It's irresponsible to extensively zone greenfield land for development without having the infrastructure in place. There is Tynwald and government policy, which is supposed to emphasise brownfield site development. There's evidence absolutely everywhere it's already happening in Peel, and there's risk that may happen in Ramsey. If you expand development on the outskirts of a town, it hollows out the town centre. So when you hear the Cabinet Office Minister and the Treasury Minister talking at the government conference or on radio interviews telling everybody that they're doing something about town centre regeneration, they're serious about brownfield site focus, it's an absolute nonsense, because what is proposed here actively undermines it, and it's not going to provide any more public sector housing. The big winners in this, absolutely, landowners and big developments. Now in Peel, we could have stood some further smaller sites of development that are included, and they're not something that I've highlighted in particular. But so we could have taken some, certainly the villages, and can take some smaller parcels of development, but with the massive size of the proposed zoning of land on the outskirts of Peel, that is urban sprawl. They're describing it as a sustainable urban extension. It's absolute greenwashing. It's nonsense, and it is far larger area than has been developed previously in Peel. And I don't think the public realise across the north and west what Tynwald are being asked to support, and they should. It's massively concerning.
You talk about infrastructure. One of the areas that you've questions recently has been about was referred to as the Peel Pong in certain areas, which was the sewage system, which hasn't been holding up to what it should have been. That's going to be, they're saying, eased with this new regional treatment plant. But infrastructure goes a lot further than that. We've also got, you look at the road in that of Peel, it's, you say you're coming from Ramsey, you're coming from the south, you're coming from Douglas. The majority of this traffic, as things stand at the minute, going in the morning and coming back in the evening, would be on the Douglas Road. And yet the area plan doesn't seem to touch on that massively. It just seems to be build the houses, and the infrastructure is part of the wider plan for this 100,000 target.
You raise a great point, Sam, and people do tend to forget that unless it's reminded to them. If all this land gets built on eventually, as I say, we probably, even if it's 600 houses, the majority of those will go to Douglas to work at the moment. There's another 100 houses, or will be thereabouts, in St John's, and everybody goes through Ballacrane, or near enough everybody will go through Ballacrane. And you imagine in the winter, the mountain road's closed, there's something happen on the coast road, everybody comes through here. It's bad enough at the moment. You could put another 700 cars through here, through Ballacrane. It'd be chaos, and things like that need to get thought of. And then when you get to Douglas, you've got the new estate going up at Braddon Bridge, up at Braddon as well, and most of those will empty down onto Braddon Bridge, Quarter Bridge as well. Things like that need thinking of. It's long term away maybe, but it's not going to get any easier, and there's no need for it yet. There's absolutely no need for it. There's an island, there's an infrastructure plan coming forward.
Strategic infrastructure needs assessment hasn't happened, along with everything else hasn't happened.
That's right. So there's so much more planning to be done island wide. There is absolutely no need for this at the moment. And we're hoping to persuade our colleagues, just to take the time and think about it, and basically not support this in Tynwald next week.
I mean, there's over 2,000 dwellings that could be provided in the whole of the Northwest Area Plan. The majority of those are proposed in Peel, which could be between 417 and 720 in Peel alone. So you add to that the fact that there is no employment land, and it's not, the arguments we've been making to Tynwald members is that this is absolutely not just about the north and the west in Peel. By the time that traffic gets through to Braddon Bridge and Quarter Bridge, along with the other developments, and there's lands that are being approved in a sort of roundabout way for strategic reserves. None of this has been thought of. The Department of Infrastructure has not updated and has no intention of updating its national infrastructure strategy. That came out in a question that I asked the Minister in the earlier part of the summer. It's frankly irresponsible, and the population sort of thresholds, if you like, that would have triggered release of the Eastern Area Plan strategic reserves, and Northwest Area Plan doesn't have that, it's all in, but that has not been met. So actually you've also got people who spoke up strongly on the Eastern Area Plan. They warned about infrastructure, they warned about population, and they said that these things need to be considered carefully. They are not standing by the right values that should be represented, instead of just this carte blanche approach of zoning, when actually you should be focusing on getting the already zone lands developed, not just giving certain parties what they want.
You said about strategic reserves, which were in the area plan for the east, one of which has been sort of activated recently for a in principle development. Do you have concerns that sort of the area plans are basically meaningless anyway? If this is, there's meant to be ways they were released under the area plan for the east. That's before we go to the whole island area plan, which is going to supersede the regional plans anyway. Does this just kind of all feel a tad unnecessary, considering that development can go ahead anyway?
Well, you do wonder what the benefit is, because at the moment, unless Tynwald asserts its authority and forces government to think again, what you've got effectively is off-island planning inspectors, at the stroke of a pen or the utterance of a few sentences, having significant influence over what gets approved and what doesn't. And it's, the premise for this is false. It's not, based on the strategic plan, which, the Northwest Area Plan is a legal thing, but it overshoots what should be provided in the strategic plan, to a huge degree. You're something like 40%, so you're dealing, with something that's already a massive gap in. And people want the infrastructure sorted. So people don't know, but the residents in Peel and the estates that have experienced, months of really bad stench from sewage works and infrastructure, and it has been going on years, but it's got a lot worse this year. That those are in estates that are right next to where we're planning potentially to have your zoning if government gets its way. And why is that? Well, they're in a situation paying rates, it's privately owned infrastructure owned by Dandara, and people can't get the issue fixed. I mean, it's just completely unacceptable and ridiculous to keep permitting this.
It just has to be said that timing is very poor on this, and it doesn't need to happen, Sam. As I said, we're trying to persuade our colleagues not to support this in Tynwald next week. But once it goes through, that's it. It'll be a fait accompli if everybody supports it, or the majority support it next week. That will be it, as Kate said, from December the 1st. It will then become, and we'll be back to where we were in 1989 with well over 100 acres zoned for housing.
Just you touched on when the area plan for the East was going through, there was a lot of MHKs who in Onchan, Douglas and out to Middle famously, actually not because of the Chief Minister at the time's role in the area plan then. People will criticise sort of the opposition just a little bit and say there's a touch of NIMBYism and all this. You're happy to see development of housing, just not in your constituency.
Well, I'd say we've had our fair share in the last 35 years now, more than our fair share. But do you know what? That's supported some of the businesses in the town, the hostelries, and the hospitality industry, and some of the shops and that. And but we've had our fair share. And it's actually, like I said before, let's go back and have a look at the island plan first, and let's get it right first time. It's not necessary, and there are other areas, and we've talked about the reserve sites. There are absolutely other areas which would cause a lot less chaos on the roads and for all sorts of reasons if they're in other places. And as Kate said right at the beginning, there are little pockets still around the town. The ministers of DEFA has still got a planning application for 92 houses sitting on a desk for the far side of town. We haven't had that yet, so that's part of another 100 houses. And God knows how many cars going through to Douglas in the morning once that'll be built. And it'll happen, there's no doubt about it. So there's other pockets around that, we're happy to have infills and stuff like that, but another 100 plus acres on the outskirts of the town is not needed at this time. And the farmers probably don't need it either.
I think what we need for the island is responsible spatial planning across the board, and that's really what the update to the strategic plan, which people are talking about now, should help facilitate, and it's what an all-island area plan could facilitate. I did support colleagues in Tynwald during the area plan for the East. I didn't live in the East. It was because actually there were severe questions around numbers and concerns about over-provision, and I could get that. So my point to Tynwald members, including some of those colleagues at the time now, is think about this in the same way, and the potential long-term damaging impact for the island. Just be responsible, be proportionate in what is being proposed. Don't sanction massive oversupply if you're not going to meet it with the infrastructure especially.